Hi, I'm Peggy Wright. In January 2000, Overeaters Anonymous will celebrate 40 years of life-changing support to the compulsive overeater. A small act by two women helping one another in 1960 mushroomed into the worldwide network of OA. Poised at the brink of a new millennium, Overeaters Anonymous can look back with pride. More importantly, OA faces the future with anticipation and rededication. I'm here today with Rozanne S., co-founder of Overeaters Anonymous. To commemorate the 40th anniversary of OA, a 12-step organization that has helped so many compulsive overeaters restore their lives to health and happiness, Rozanne has agreed to share her recollections of its simple beginnings and giant strides. Rozanne, thanks very much for being with us today. Let's talk about the beginnings of Overeaters Anonymous. Were you slender or overweight as a little girl?
Slender until I was about 5 or 6. And then I found food. Food was my best friend. It covered everything. Fright, loneliness, boredom, resentment, anger, anything at all. And all that time I was a little bit overweight all the way through grammar school, all the way through high school, until I hit 18, and then I decided I wanted to date. And so I gave up excess food, got down to 118, and I dated. After a while, I turned back to food again, gained a lot of weight, and then when I was 25, I decided to move from Chicago to Los Angeles, where my grandparents lived, and I was looking for a husband. And so I decided to give up excess food again, and I got down to 118. I met my wonderful Marvin. We've been married a little over 43 years now, and I was, as I say, 118. The night he proposed was in August. That's what I weighed. By the time we were married in December, I was already 129. All it took was the ring on my finger for me to start taking back the food, and then there was no stopping me.
As you know, I'm not an OA member. So tell me, where did you get the idea to start this organization to help yourself and other overeaters?
Well, the idea really came in 2 steps. In November, late November of 1958, I was binging and watching TV, which was my usual activity. And I was watching Paul Coates' Confidential File, which was then a nationally syndicated television interview show. He was interviewing a man from a brand new organization called Gamblers Anonymous. And I'm a big world saver. And my husband had a friend who was a compulsive gambler. And so the next day I called the station, got the address, and my husband Marvin and I took his friend down to the old Mayflower Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, kind of a seedy area, I think. But we went, and you know, that was the most important night of my life, I think. I was transfixed by the meeting. The men they were all men, a sprinkling of wives, and they were talking about lying and cheating and stealing. I thought I was the only one who did these things. I thought that the people who did those things were in jail and everyone else on the street was pure and honest. And here I was, sneaky and lying and dishonest and stealing food and taking it from the grocery stores, doing all that stuff. And I thought that I was the only one here. I'm hearing all these men saying these things, and I thought, I am not alone. It was truly remarkable. And so I went home. And for 3 weeks I stayed on my diet, and then of course I lost it all. And by the next year, just a year later, I was 161.
How did you feel when you saw those numbers on the scale?
I was horrified, and I was absolutely frantic. And I thought to myself, I have to do something about this. The only weight loss organization at the time was TOPS. So I looked in the phone book, and they were not listed. I was so frightened. I knew that I needed help. So I said to Marvin, my husband, I'm going back to GA to see if I can start a group like theirs for people like me. And so I took myself back to GA, and it was then 2.5 years old. It was a year stronger. A lot of those men had not gambled since they had first come in. And I was just as entranced, and transformed is the right word, as I had been the year before. So after the meeting was over, I went up to their founder, Jim Willis, who has passed away many years ago. And I said to him, and you just had to see this, Jim was maybe 6'3", 6'4", very tall, gray hair, very skinny. And here I am, 5'2", and very fat. And so I looked up at him and I said, do you think that a group like this, a program like this, would work for people like me. Jim was also in AA, so he understood cross-addiction. And he looked down on me. He had the most wonderful, gentle smile. He looked down on me and he said, I don't see why not. You want just a local group? What do you want? And I said, no. Now, I'll go into it in a moment, but I had already thought of a name for this organization. And I said, no. Someday, Overeaters Anonymous will be as big or bigger than AA, and it will be all around the world. Now, it's not as big as AA, but it is all around the world. And the vision that I had from the moment I had the idea, it has come to be.
So how did you come up with the proposed name for the organization?
Well, I just thought, I thought there was a Fatties Anonymous, but I wasn't sure. And I said, I can't name it Fatties Anonymous because we're not going to be fat. And so I said, well, what is it that we are? We are compulsive overeaters. But I was an advertising copywriter, so I knew that Compulsive Overeaters Anonymous was just a big mouthful. And I said, how about Overeaters Anonymous? That sounds pretty good to me. So I next day or whenever, I said to my husband, what do you think of Overeaters Anonymous? And he said, it sounds fine to me. And so that's the name, Overeaters Anonymous.
Was it easy to find another overeater to join you in this group?
It was awful, just awful. I had only been in Los Angeles from Chicago, maybe 5 or 6 years, and I didn't have very many friends. But I was in a co-op nursery school. My oldest was then 3.5. The little one was still 20 months. And so I approached some of the women in Debbie's nursery school, and I said the absolutely wrong thing. I said, I see you have the same problem I do. This did not go over very well. But my recollection is that I talked to about 20 people, 20 women. Nobody would join in this thing with me. And I really didn't know what to do. And then one day, I was walking down the street. I had Julie in the stroller, my baby. And across the street was my neighbor, Jo, who was very big. Jo was over 200 pounds. She was wheeling her baby in the stroller. And so I said hi, walked across the street, and we started walking down together. The night before, my husband had belonged to the Beverly Hills YMCA, and he had said, why don't you go to the Y and see if you can start something through them? So I'm walking down the street with Jo, and she said, let's go to the park. And I said, I can't. I just can't. I'm in a big hurry. Across the street to the front of my house. Well, what's your rush? And I said, I have to go to the Y. I have to see about starting this group, but I know you won't be interested. Well, what's going on? And I said, I just know you won't be interested, but I have to go. I'm in a hurry, and I'll see you another time because I know you're not interested. What do you mean not interested? What's the name of the organization? And I looked at her and said, Overeaters Anonymous. She looked at me and said, you know, I think I would be interested. And at that moment, Overeaters Anonymous was born.
When did you hold the first OA meeting, and how many people were there?
January 19th, 1960, that was our first meeting. And I had told Jo that I knew of a woman, the wife of a GA member, Bernice, who was also overweight. And I talked Bernice into coming. So at the first meeting, there were Jo and Bernice and myself, just the three of us. And at the third meeting, we met in Jo's husband's office. And at the third meeting, Bernice turned to us. We had just started. Bernice turned to us and said, my doctor said dieting is making me nervous. And she got up and left, just like that. And I turned to Jo and said, dieting's making me nervous too. And Jo said, you know, I don't think I'm interested in this. And I was just frantic. And I started to cry, and I said, I can't do this without you. You have to help me. I can't do it alone. And Jo, years later, Jo told me that it was as if I'd thrown down the gauntlet, and she picked up the challenge and stayed.
Did you decide to just adapt AA's and GA's 12 steps and 12 traditions for OA?
Oh, no. No, I was 30 years old. I thought I had all the answers. I thought I knew everything. And so I said, I had this typewriter and typewriter table. I put AA, Jim had given me a copy of AA's steps because I hadn't yet been to a meeting. AA steps and GA steps. And I said to myself, my profession had been advertising copywriting. And so I said, that Bill Wilson, he was the founder of AA, since passed away, but I said, that Bill Wilson was just a stockbroker, and I'm a professional writer. I'm going to smooth out these steps. Can't believe my arrogance. And so I read the steps through, came to step 3, the one about surrender, and I hit my fist on the typewriter table and said, I am not so weak that I have to turn my life and my will over to the care of any God, whether he exists or not. Made a big X through step 3. Then I looked at it and said, I have only 11 steps. I want a 12-step program. And so I had to put something in, and I'm a dietitian's daughter, and I knew something about nutrition. And so I said, I'll put a step in about going to a doctor. Before we start this program, we should go to a doctor and let him advise us regarding our own calorie allotments and wisest nutritional program. I didn't know that doctors didn't even know anything about nutrition in those days, but that's what I said. Then I went through the steps. I took God out everywhere I could. And I got to the end and I said, this is not too great not to have God anywhere. So I sort of sprinkled it back in judiciously. And then I combined a couple more steps, and in the place of whatever step it was, on step 10 I said, we shall set up a regular pattern of eating for ourselves, and this we pray we may maintain for the rest of our lives. That later went into the body of some copy we wrote. Then the AA's 12 step had something about spiritual awakening, and I said, that's not going to be in my 12 steps, and I just took it out and talked about helping other compulsive overeaters. Now, this is the first piece of OA literature. It was a mimeographed sheet with my rewritten 12 steps and the Serenity Prayer on the bottom, and I thought it was terrific.
What were those very early meetings like, and how many people attended?
They were very lonely. A lot of times, especially in the first few months, it was just Joe and me in those big leather chairs in her husband's office. Then in April, Barbara came in. Barbara was the friend of my husband's cousin, and my cousin had said to her, you've got to see what Rozanne is doing. She's losing weight. Go wherever she is, go. Barbara came in April, and she stayed for several years. And so that first, until we had a little publicity a little later on, there were anywhere from 2 to 10 people, mostly 5, 6, 7.
Did you or Joe go to any more GA or AA meetings?
Well, Jim insisted that we go to AA. So I said to Joe in the very early time, I made her go to GA with me. She didn't even want to, but I made her go a couple of times. Then Jim said, you must go to AA. And so I dragged her down. She said to me, I don't want to go where all those Elkies are. And I said, never mind, we're going to go. And she came with me to several AA meetings. And it was there that I began to really learn about the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. I had, up until then, totally ignored the 12 traditions. AA had such a wonderful effect. I went to AA meetings for 10 years. I'm not an alcoholic, but I went so that I could learn about the 12 steps and 12 traditions, so I could learn more about their program.
What made you decide to approach Paul Coates for an interview about OA?
Well, Jim came to a few of our meetings that summer, and he really was OA's first sponsor. And I talked to him also. I kept saying we need some publicity, and I had said it to Barbara and to Joe, that we weren't going to grow unless we had publicity. And I remembered the Paul Coates show, so I called them all summer, and they didn't want to do anything, and they had their fill of overeating shows. That's what they told me. Then suddenly, one night in October, everybody's asleep. All my babies are asleep, and the phone rings, and I raced into the darkened living room, picked up the phone, and it was one of the writers from the Paul Coates show. And he said, Paul is taking a European trip. We're taping 3 shows in advance. We have a whole next Tuesday. Can you be there? I was so excited. And I said, oh, yes, yes. Now, Barbara Joe by that time had left OA. She'd lost a lot of weight, but she left. Barbara had also lost a lot of weight, and I'd gone from 161 to 110, so I looked great. The other people were all fat, and I didn't want them there. They insisted on having all 7 people. They said they were going to pan across the whole group, and I said, okay, we're there. I hung up the phone. I was so excited, and they told me that the taping would be done November 1st, 1960.
How did you handle anonymity for the taping?
Well, by that time I'd been to a few AA meetings, and I heard anonymity, but I didn't quite understand it. However, I said to Barbara, compulsive overeating is a physical disease, and weight loss shows. We have to get this organization off the ground. You and I are going on full face, and I will never do it again, and I never have.
What happened when that interview was over?
Well, we were walking out of the room, and one of the writers came up to thank us, and we thought we had done so well. And he said, "We'll let you know when it runs in the other cities." And I just looked at him. Other cities? I thought this was a local show. And he said, "Oh, no. We run in 5 cities. We're going to run in Sacramento and San Francisco in California, Minneapolis, Minnesota, Tucson, Arizona, and Tampa, Florida." We were speechless. I didn't know what to do. But we decided, they said it'll run in Los Angeles on Thanksgiving Eve. So we thought we had a few weeks to get ready.
Did you talk to Jim Willis after the interview?
Oh, yes, after the taping, but before the interview ran in Los Angeles. And I told him I was so excited, it had happened so fast, and here was the interview, and I hear this dead silence on the other end of the phone. And he said to me, took a breath and said, "Rozanne, I want to talk to you about the 12 steps. They have to be changed back to AA steps, with the exception of alcoholic and change to compulsive overeater, of course." I was so stubborn. I still didn't believe in God, and I refused. And he said, "Listen to me, Rozanne. All your life you've had different diets. Those are powers outside of you. And you've had pills, and those are powers outside of you. And you've talked to other people, and those are powers outside of you. So if you will take the capital P off of power and make it a small p and say, I am willpowerless over food. My life is unmanageable." And I thought about that, and I said, okay, willpower is a dieter's term. And with that word, Jim got me. He opened the door to spirituality for me. I didn't quite step over the threshold yet. It was to be 2 more years, but he did open the door.
What were the results of the TV interview?
Oh, innocence is bliss. I was so excited. I went into a little post office in Beverly Hills and rented a small box, Post Office Box 3372, Beverly Hills, California. And incidentally, I had done that just before the taping because I knew that we were going to give out that address during the interview, and we did. When Paul asked us how people could contact us, we gave them that address. So now the interview is over, and I had talked to Jim, and every day I treasured that box. Every day I went in, I looked at the box, and it was empty. Then one day, I don't know, about a week or so later, I saw a piece of paper folded around something, and I said, "Oh, somebody in the post office has seen our registration and they want some information." So I remember taking the key, opening the box, pulling out the paper, and the floor was flooded with envelopes. No one had notified us. The show had run in Sacramento and San Francisco. We had 50 letters. 50 letters! There's nobody but me and my typewriter in my little 10 by 10 dining room. And, well, that was it. I was stunned.
Well, how did you answer all of those letters and help people form new groups?
Well, after the first 3 shows had run, Barbara and I got together. As I said, Joe had already left OA. And we called everybody in the Los Angeles area who'd sent in a phone number. And we invited them to our next meeting. And I had scurried around trying to find a place. And we rented a room at the Beverly Hills YMCA. And on November 29th, 1960, we held our first meeting after the Coach show. The week before, we'd had 5 people, 5 women, and that week we had 75 people. And Barbara and I sat up at a table. We had that first mimeographed sheet that I referred to, and the Serenity Prayer, and we told our stories. We told what had happened to us. I really looked great. I was a size 6 or 8, and as I said, I was 30 years old or so. I was very young and very arrogant, and but we told our stories, and the room was so quiet. They really listened to us. And we handed out the original 1-page piece of literature and the Serenity Prayer, but we still had no traditions.
Tell me more about that first Los Angeles meeting.
Well, we had a coffee break, and during the break, a woman came up to me. Her name was Lorraine, and she said, "My husband and I have a printing business, and I'll be glad to print anything for you at cost because I'm going to be a member." And Lorraine was really sent to us because I was about to write another piece of literature. After that meeting, the night after that meeting, I wrote what turned out to be our first major four-page piece of literature. That's this. And it told a little bit about OA and how it can help you, a little bit about our history. And I had listened to Jim, and so I'd rewritten the steps. These are what I call the transitional steps. And I also did something with the 12 traditions. I didn't understand the word traditions, and GA called them, I think, the 12, the Unity Program, and so I called ours the 12 Unifying Rules. I didn't know that we didn't have any rules at the time, but that's what I called them. I took out the nutritional stuff because Jim had said, put the physiological stuff in the body of the copy you're going to write, keep the spiritual stuff in. And so I did. In place of that step 3 that I had removed, I said, we have gradually learned to place our complete faith and trust in this power. And all our steps were in the present tense because we didn't have a past.
What happened to you and your family after the telecast?
No, the intensity, the confusion was unbelievable. Along with taking care of my family, my husband and babies, I had to set up an office to find a permanent way to have some kind of record keeping for all the mail that was coming in. And so in my little 10-foot by 10-foot dining room, I set up a typewriter table, cardboard carton for files, for letters. I also had our dining room table and my baby's feeding table and all of that. And I had been a secretary, so I knew how to set up an office, and I'd been a writer, and I was still a writer. I've always been a writer, so I knew how to write the literature. And I wrote a form letter to everyone, and at the bottom of that form letter, to everyone who had written in, at the bottom of that form letter were 2 boxes to check. One if you wanted to start a group, one if you wanted to join a group.
Was your husband Marvin supportive of your efforts, and is he still encouraging?
He has been wonderful. How this man could have put up with all of this stuff. We'd only been married maybe 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. And he never said a word. In the early years of OA, some of the women came in crying. Their husbands felt threatened, I think. And they said, it's OA or me, make your choice. Marvin never has done that. All these years, he's never done that. He has been only supportive and encouraging.
Did other groups form after the TV interviews?
There were 3 groups in the San Fernando Valley, which is over the hill from Los Angeles, and then a group formed in Northern California, and another one, I think, in Tempe, Arizona. There was someone came in and said there's an Overeaters Anonymous group in Tempe, Arizona. We wrote to them, and they joined in with us. So, and there was one in Hollywood also, and I think one in Long Beach. So those are the groups that started almost right after Paul Coates.
I know that you've written the history of OA, called Beyond Our Wildest Dreams. In the book, you described the night when OA became closed to men. When and why did this happen?
Oh, I remember that. We had, the letters that had been coming in had been both men and women. But there were, and I felt OA should be open to everybody, men and women. There was a little contingent, including Barbara, that felt that we couldn't talk about our feelings. I don't know what we were talking about that was so intimate, but they couldn't talk about it in front of men. And so we formed a service board for the original Tuesday night group only. And on June 14th, 1961, we had a meeting, and it was heavy contention, but the majority voted to close OA to men. And that's the way it stood for quite a while. They also tried to, now that was to apply to the Tuesday night group only, but they all tried to coax the other groups into agreement.
In July 1961, the first meeting directory was published, including information about the 16 existing meetings. Why did you decide to make this directory?
I felt it was so important. Supposing that someone wrote in and wanted information about OA, they needed information about how to go to a place, and I kept telling those people to keep that directory up to date, because what if the secretaries changed or the meeting place changed and a newcomer went and there was a darkened room? What a terrible thing that would be. So I have always felt that keeping the meeting directories up to date was absolutely vital.
Did things go smoothly after the Paul Coates telecast, or were there some conflicts?
Oh, there have always been conflicts in OA, but this first one we called this the spiritual psychological conflict. And that came as a result of my becoming more spiritual myself. And the people who had come in when I had taken God out, and it was a very serious conflict. We had a lot of arguments about that all the time.
I understand OA held its first business conference in 1962. Whose idea was this?
That was my idea. I had grown up in my family with my father. One of the functions of my father's job was to set up conferences and conventions. So I'd grown up with that all around me. I was imbued with that. And we had the 16 groups, and I said, having heard my father all those years, we have to get together. We have to have a conference. And so I was going to set up a conference. Then someone said, let's have an open sharing after the conference. And that's the forerunner of the OA conventions.
In the first conference bulletin you mailed to all 16 groups, you introduced the word abstinence. Why was this word so important to you?
Well, in June, I think it was June, I had been to an AA meeting, and I'd heard the speakers talking about abstinence from alcohol. Prior to that, I'd always heard them say sobriety. This was my first time hearing them say that. I sat in the back of the room and said, it was a revelation. I said, that's what's wrong with all of us in OA. We are not abstaining from eating at any time. We're eating carrots and celery and low-cal between meals. We have to close our mouths from the end of one meal to the beginning of the next. So I took my new idea back to the group, and I said the word comes from the Greek. It means to stay away from. Some thought it was an inspiration, and the rest of them just laughed at me, but I didn't care. So when I sent the bulletin out to all the groups announcing the upcoming conference, I included on page 3 the introduction of abstinence. And I talked about my visit to AA, and then I said, that concept is abstinence. And I told how it just meant three moderate meals a day with nothing in between but no-cal beverages and so forth. And in other words, total abstinence from compulsive eating. That was the first introduction of that concept into OA.
You said earlier that OA had closed its meetings to men in 1961, yet according to you, there was a man from Texas at that first conference.
Well, July 15th is my birthday, and on July 15th, 1962, we were having a celebration at home. Phone rang, and I said, who's calling on a Sunday night? Picked up the phone, and it's a guy from Texas with a Texas twang, and he said, my name is AG, and he had started 5 groups called Gluttons Anonymous in Texas. And he'd been trying to find other like-minded groups. He contacted AA in New York, and I'd left our information with them. And so he called me, and he said, I'd like to come, and I'd like to bring some delegates. And I said, oh, sure, of course. Now, by that time, the people who had opposed men were gone from OA. So I went back to the group, and I said, I had to tell you what I did. And I said, he's flying his own plane in. Well, we were all housewives with little children. And so most of us were anyway. Everybody was so excited and so impressed. I said, he's a businessman. He's coming in his own plane. Oh, everybody was so impressed, so excited. And so he came. That was the introduction of men into OA.
Did that conference go smoothly, or were there differences of opinion?
That conference did not go smoothly. There was still that enormous spiritual, psychological fight going on. AG was from the outside, so that he hadn't been part of the arguments in Los Angeles. He was also a businessman. He ran his own business. He understood the corporate setups. He was also sent to us in the way that Lorraine had been when she came in with her printing press. And we had a lot of fights, but I think AG was really quite responsible for smoothing over some of it.
What were some of the results of that 1962 conference?
Well, most important, we adapted the 12 steps and 12 traditions from AA, changing only alcoholic to compulsive overeater and alcohol to food. That was the most important. I was elected the first unpaid national secretary, and we decided to establish an office, which was still in my dining room, and a phone that was listed in the Los Angeles directory. And that's because I was adamant. TOPS had not been listed 3 years earlier, and I said, we have to have a listing so that people will know where to call. We also elected a 7-member board of trustees.
How did you let all the members know what had happened at that conference?
Well, this is the first conference bulletin. It's called Conference Report, September 1962. It is the forerunner of what is now our magazine, the OA Lifeline. And in it, I told them what we had adopted. We also decided to print a booklet. I was to write a 16-page booklet, which came out to be questions and answers about OA and the OA recovery program. And I told them everything that had happened at the conference. That's how we let them know. It was this bulletin.
What have been the biggest problems facing OA since the beginning?
Well, I did describe the spiritual psychological, but right after the conference, late in 1962, Irene B. came in. She had found an article in AA Today, which had been published by the Grapevine at their 25th anniversary, It was written by Father Dowling, who was a non-AA friend of AA's. He was an overweight person, and his doctor had advised him to cut out flour, butter, sugar, and salt. So Irene came into a group waving this book and said, I have the answer for everybody. We have to have an eating plan without flour and without sugar, and low carbohydrate, very low carbohydrate. That started a fight that's been going on since then. We are still fighting. We have had 38 years of fights over food. We had, in fact, we were so mad. I was so mad because it wasn't my idea. Now, I wouldn't admit that for maybe 2 decades. I wanted everything in OA to be my idea, but this was Irene's. We refused to print it, so she printed it under her husband's copyright, and we called it the gold sheet. Then we had the green sheet, the pink sheet, the gray sheet, the blue sheet, dignity of choice. Then there was Westminster, OA Plus, and HOW. Well, we still have HOW today. That HOW stands for honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. The attitude of these groups is that these things are required. They called us the Fat Serenity groups, even though we weren't fat. And now they're calling us regular OA, and what we're striving for is unity, because there are no requirements in OA. This is a suggested program of recovery.
Despite these disagreements, why do you feel OA grew so rapidly in those early years?
I think it was a gift from God. The timing was absolutely right. There was, as I said, an OA group in Tempe, Arizona. There had been another one somewhere in the country going for 10 years. It was the timing that was right. I never saw anything take off so fast and so successfully. So I would say that the timing was right. Also, I lived in Los Angeles, a big city. The other ones were in very small towns, and I think that contributed to it.
Besides Paul Coates, have there been any other public figures helpful in spreading the word about OA?
Oh yes, Dear Abby and Ann Landers. In February of 1965, I was reading Dear Abby, and there was a letter about Overeaters Anonymous. Somebody had written in from OA, hadn't told me, and here's this letter about OA. I went to the post office box, and we still had P.O. Box 3372. I went in a few days later to pick up the mail, and there's a notice from the postmaster. And he took me into the back room, and he said, what are you trying to do to us? What are you selling? In the back room were sacks and sacks and sacks of mail. We received a total of 7,000 letters from that. I was just absolutely stunned at that point. So we had to set up something. Let me back up a little bit. There was one morning, I remember that, 2,500 letters stacked in the back of my kitchen. I couldn't get into the alcove to do the laundry, and I was taking my girls in every day to pick up the mail. And I remember Debbie, who was then maybe 7 or 8, piping up and saying, Mommy, you look just like Santa Claus with that sack on your back.
So how did you answer all of those letters?
Well, I was really getting very tired at that point, and a few months later I resigned. Margaret came in to take my place. She'd been an executive secretary. I turned over the office to her. Then Hilda and Esther stepped in. Hilda's garage and sewing room, she was a seamstress, became OA's first literature warehouse. Esther would go in and pick up the mail. And I didn't mention, but a couple of years earlier, I'd gone to Maxine, one of our very original members, who is still in OA, and said, I need a treasurer. And Maxine took over the treasury for 13 or 14 years. So at that point when I resigned, we had Margaret, Hilda, Esther, and Maxine. We had the beginning of a real office, but it was still in our homes.
In 1966, you wrote an OA book called I Put My Hand in Yours. What was the purpose of this book?
Well, I was helping Margaret, even though I'd resigned, and I said to her one day, we are writing the same letter over and over and over and over. I've got to write a book. I have to write a book that will act as an older OA member for the new groups that are starting up. And I remember having this mental picture image of, almost like the Titanic, of someone throwing a lifeline to someone else, putting out a hand to help. And so I said, that's what I'm going to call it. I put my hand in yours. And the opening paragraph says, I put my hand in yours, and together we could do what we could never do alone. And in it were specifics about setting up a group, setting up chairs, anonymity, publicity, our AA friends. It even had a suggested meeting format. And that's what we sent out for years.
Have you abstained from compulsive eating from your first meeting, or have you relapsed?
Well, I wish that I had. But I started out at 161 and got down to 110 and stayed there for a number of years. In 1965 or 6, I started overeating again. By 1973, I weighed 185, which is my top weight. Then I lost some weight again and held that for several years, although I never got back down to 110, but I lost some weight. In 1980, I started overeating again, and by 1986, I weighed 171. My current abstinence dates from November 1986. I'm maintaining a 55 to 60 pound weight loss. I have held it all those years, and God willing will continue to hold it. And I weigh now about 129 or so. And it's been wonderful. So I have the years of abstinence from 1986 on.
Why do you keep coming back?
I have no place else to go. If I am alone again, I will eat again. I need the help and support of other compulsive overeaters, and that is why I keep coming back.
What is your vision for OA in the future?
Really very hopeful. Right now we're at a turning point, and there are groups of people in OA who insist on having things their own way, and they want everyone else to follow along. They have forgotten that the 12 steps and 12 traditions are the foundation of our program, especially Tradition 1, which says our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon OA unity. And with that unity, if we abide by it, we can be the fellowship that I dreamed of so many years ago, a real haven of hope for compulsive overeaters everywhere.